Today is Tuesday, October 18th, 2016. It's 9 a.m. We're at the Palm Coast City Hall for a regularly scheduled meeting of the Palm Coast City Council. Would you please rise and join me in a pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Roll call, please.
Mayor Netz?
Here.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Here.
Councilmember Cuff? Here. Councilmember DiLorenzo?
Here.
Councilmember Nobile? Here. All members are present.
Thank you. First item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of the October 4th City Council meeting and the October 11th City Council workshop. Are there any additions, corrections, or is there a motion to approve?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries without objection. Agenda item number 2. First reading of an ordinance amending the Land Development Code, Chapter 11, Tree Protection, Landscaping Buffers, Irrigation, and Chapter 14, Glossary. Mr. Reichman.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this is an ordinance of the City of Palm Coast, Florida, amending the city's United Land Development Code, repealing and replacing Chapter 11, Tree Protection, Landscaping, Buffers, and Irrigation to clarify intent and to reflect current development trends. This ordinance provides for severability, for codification, for conflicts, and does provide for an effective date.
Thank you. Mr. Landon.
Good morning. This is actually a major rewrite of our land development code. Our original code had a very robust landscape ordinance, or section of the ordinance, but we've learned a lot and been a very excellent process of a lot of different groups involved. Very proud of staff going through and working out details, and I think we have a lot smarter code. That's the way I describe it. It doesn't really reduce our standards as much as makes them smarter based on experience that what we've learned. So I think, Ray, are you taking the lead here and
Sure.
go from there,
Yeah,
please?
I'll take a few minutes. Just want to stress what Mr. Landon said. It was a major rewrite of our land development code. And one thing that we felt was very, very important was the public process. And we started a public process very early on to try to get as many stakeholders as we could. One group, Flagler County Association of Responsible Development, is a group of professionals that include folks from the development community, landscape architects, professionals, attorneys, and developers. And we felt it was key for us to actually work hand in hand with the folks that actually work out in the field and actually are utilizing our code. So we put a lot of stake into working with them. We didn't agree on 100%, but it was a great team effort and a great process to have them involved early on, as well as our citizens of Palm Coast. We had numerous workshops and public forums that were advertised. So it really was a total, there's some things that Hoover will point out, some of the items that we improved upon, because it was a new code. I mean, our first code was 2008. And it was really the first time that we were able to practice with the new code, and the goal is to improve the code. So with that said, Mr. Hoover will have some of the details in the presentation.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council, and citizens.
Morning.
Morning. I'm Bill Hoover of the Community Development Department. And on September 8, 2015, the City Council at a workshop directed staff to proceed updating the landscape code. And then on December 2015, after a draft ordinance was prepared, we forwarded it to FCARD for their review and comments. And then in the spring of 2016, staff and FCARD met 7 or 8 times and went through the entire draft on a line-by-line basis. On June 16th, we did a citywide press release, and at that time we made the draft code available on the city's website, where residents and business owners could comment directly back to staff. The Planning Board and the BEAC held joint workshops on June 22nd, June 29th, and July 13th. And in the first two of these, we advertised those in the newspaper, welcoming the public to provide input. On August 4th of this year, the Planning Board recommended approval of the amendment to City Council. And as we went through this public involvement process, we heard these comments, the ones listed here, anywhere from 2, maybe 5, 6, 7 times on these. One, shade trees need larger islands and spacing. The landscape standards are not flexible enough. The code was not user-friendly. Landscape plantings were too dense. Ensure we maintain our beautiful landscaping, and this was the wow factor. We heard this probably half a dozen times, that when someone got off of I-95 at the Palm Coast Parkway, they were very impressed with Palm Coast due to the landscaping. More flexibility regarding field changes for irrigation, excessive mitigation for single-family tree removal, maintenance and enforcement issues, single-family landscape requirements were too extensive, and landscape buffers were too wide. For discussion purposes, the changes we've made to the landscape code, we put those into 6 classifications so that they could be more easily reviewed. For increasing landscaping aesthetics, we increased the minimum size of landscape islands for shade trees. We also increased the spacing of shade trees and understory trees to relieve overcrowding and improve tree health. We added specific design standards so ponds and lakes will have rounded and natural shapes. Added specific planting standards for temporary sales trailers and required owners to remove invasive plant species such as Brazilian peppers. And on the picture on the left, you can see a 4-foot landscape island, and you can see the trees not doing very well. And on the right, you can see all those trees planted at the same time, with the tree in the small island not doing very well versus the tree in the large island, as we're now proposing, doing exceptionally well. And this is a picture of oaks at 25 foot on center with crepe myrtles planted in between there. And you can see they're a little bit tight. And on the left, this is Palm Coast Parkway in front of the Ford dealership. We have oaks at 25 foot on center. And in the right, you can see oaks again, 25 foot on center. And when they're younger, it looks very well, but as the trees mature, they tend to get tighter and tighter. What we're proposing is to have trees 50 foot on center, the shade trees, and then in between each of the oak trees, 25 foot away, would be an understory tree. For user friendliness, we reformatted and modified the text throughout the entire chapter. We simplified the determination of buffer standards from 3 steps to 2 steps. This is mostly for design professionals. We clarified the tree bank fund and basically we made it very specific how the tree costs would be determined and what the funds could be used for, such as mulching, staking the tree, and design fees. We removed the confusion between screening and visual buffers by creating 3 new standards, and this would be including definitions: a low screen planting, a medium screen planting, and a tall screen planting. And we created specific design standards relating to visibility at intersections, again for design professionals.
Those intersections, is that on commercial, is that on residential, or both?
That's on, that would be on any intersection. For instance, the table, if you're proposing a driveway, let's say onto Palm Coast Parkway, you would look under driveway, and Palm Coast Parkway would be an arterial, so you would have a safe site triangle that would actually be, the side of the triangle along the arterial roadway would be longer, and then along the driveway, commercial driveway or residential, it would be shorter. So it would only apply to like multifamily and commercial type projects.
Okay.
To increase flexibility, we created specific design standards for industrial projects rather than lumping them in with commercial projects. We also increased the options for landscape architects for providing required foundation plannings. We created the option of having a alternative landscape betterment plan, and this would be, there's only specific categories that this can be used for. We have less strict options for expansions of commercial sites in order to promote buildings and businesses to expand or redevelop. We created a 10% tolerance level on plant sizes due to plant variability, and 20% tolerance levels during times when landscape materials are in extremely short supply. For single-family homes, we reduced the planting and replacement standards for trees. We allow homeowners to have more understory trees, and specific and simple standards were created for foundation shrubs. We allowed additional understory trees at the option of the builder or homeowner, and if the FPL overpruned or damaged a tree, it may be removed without a permit or mitigation.
Can I just ask one question on that last slide? On the first one, if somebody's tree comes down, it's a 4-foot tree, you usually make them put a 4-foot back, and now they won't have to do that? They can do a smaller tree on a residential?
Right now, the typical lot requires 4 to 5 trees, and the shade trees have to comprise 40%. So as proposed, they would only have to have 1 shade tree. So if they had 2 shade trees and one was damaged, they took it down, then they could replace that with an understory tree, which would be like a crepe myrtle or a ligustrum tree, something like that, or a palm tree. To improve maintenance and enforcement, a lot of this, we just made it more specific and spelled it out more clearly. One of the things we had was trees must be allowed to grow naturally and not be overpruned. Typically, this is on commercial sites where they're overpruned to improve the visibility of the business. On commercial sites and multifamily projects of 25 or more units, then tree trimmers would have to be trained by the city or be certified arborist. This would only be for trimming tree branches 1 inch or larger above the height of 8 feet. So landscape maintenance people can still trim the limbs if they're hanging in there, they're hitting them in the face or over a sidewalk. Before a commercial building or parking area can be expanded, all required plantings that are dead or damaged would have to be replaced. We clarified numerous other provisions of the landscape chapter to assist code enforcement. The picture on the left shows a shade tree that's being overpruned. You're required not to trim it more than 1/3 of the way up. And on the right, you can see a shrub that, you can see the hedge there, and to the left of that You can see a understory tree that looks like a shrub because it's been over pruned. We eliminated some buffer shrub plantings adjacent to lakes or preserves, so views are not blocked and can be enjoyed by persons. On most specially designated roadways, the front buffers would be reduced from 35 feet to 25 feet, and on non-designated roads, including local roads, the front and side street buffers would go from 20 feet to 10 feet. And on some specially designated roadway segments with quality tree canopies, the front buffers would remain at 35 feet. And it can be, you can see that on this in the yellow highlighted roads. One is Palm Coast Parkway east of I-95. Another is Palm Harbor Parkway south of the bridge. And the third one is Colbert Lane for the first 2,200 feet south of Palm Coast Parkway southeast. And the next two slides show some pictures we took, and the pictures are taken a little bit lower than what you would view from the roadway, but the idea was we were trying to show that in a 20 or 25 foot buffer, you can still have quality landscape features. This one, both of these are in town center. The Planning Board recommended approval to City Council to the ordinance as we presented last week. We've made a few adjustments this week based on comments at last week's workshop. The BEAC differed with the Planning Board and recommended 3 different buffer standards. One, in buffers, the minimum spacing of 30 feet in lieu of 50 feet for shade trees. And on type A buffers, this would be along non-specially designated roads, which I have mentioned may be local roads even, remain at 20 feet instead of going to 10 feet. And a type E buffer against adjacent properties remain at 25 feet instead of going to 20 feet.
These are changes we made from last week's proposal?
No, these are the same as last week's. Really the only addition we made is the text that Councilmember De Lorenzo wanted, which is, I can show you here in the next slide. It's shown on page 16 of the strike-through version.
Do me a favor, go back one.
You have two bodies making recommendations.
Yeah, but what are we, what is in?
What's in the ordinance?
Recommendation before us is the PLDRB recommendation. The Beautification and Environmental Advisory Committee says they would prefer this.
Gotcha,
But
okay.
The recommendation to us is the PLDRB version.
All
right.
So we added a new paragraph to section 1103.01 M as in Mike, and it was entitled Landscape Review for Single-Family Subdivisions by Certified HOAs. And I think Ray wrote this text, so I'll defer to him on that.
Basically, when Mr. De Lorenzo brought up at the meeting, we went back and created some language, really to provide the city some assurances that some of these HOAs that are self-regulating for landscape standards, I'll use an example. Maybe the conservatory, for example, may be able to qualify where clearly they are exceeding our landscape standards. So why are we going to, review their landscape standards when they're reviewing it? So we felt that it was important to have the association kind of fill out an application to try to qualify for this process on an annual basis. And some of the key points that I think should be required from a staff perspective is, an annual review, look at their HOA standards and to make sure that they do exceed our landscape standards. And they have kind of a self-regulating body that actually goes out and reviews the plans or does inspections, and there's some ramifications if they don't meet the HOA standards. So we're pretty comfortable if they meet all that criteria. And by no means, you know, the city still, we can go out and quality assurance check and go out and inspect to make sure they are following our standards. But we think that the language proposed will give us some reasonable assurance that they'll continue to meet our standards if they qualify.
Mr. De Lorenzo.
Yeah, the language looks really good, and I just want to make sure I read it correctly. They're still going to, as part of the permit submittal, they're going to submit the approval from the ARB or whatever whatever they call their board that reviews that, right? So they'll submit that as part of the permit package?
Yeah, they can.
Right.
Yes.
Saying that, yes, this has been reviewed to our standards, and you already know that annually our standards are greater than the city's, so we're good to go.
Right.
All right, great, thank you.
The only clarification, the city cannot enforce the HOA's enhanced standards. We can only demand that they meet our standards. They're perfectly welcome to go above and beyond, but we can't force them to do that. That would be the HOA or whomever.
Right.
Mr. Mayor and Councilmember De Lorenzo, that's correct. If you look at the last sentence in this new language, it says, every certified HOA must provide every ARC-approved landscape plan to the city. So that would at least provide assurance to the city of Palm Coast, together with the requirement that the covenants and restrictions which the HOA are applying are at least as onerous, restrictive, whatever term you want to use as the city code. And Mr. Mayor, you're correct. If some ARC-approved submittal as approved by the HOA did not meet our standards, then we would go out and we would tell them that that is not sufficient, and they're going to have to go back and fix their landscape plan to comply with our codes.
And again, this is just for landscape standards. It has nothing to do with fire-wise protection or some of our other standards in our codes. This is just for new construction for landscape. This does not include tree removal, permits that are required, and those type things.
Anything further? Council questions?
I asked about 1 million questions last time, so I think I'm good.
You've had your fill?
Yeah.
Seeing no council question, we'll open the meeting from the public, and if the public wish to be heard on this item, come up to the podium, give us your name, please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
I remember a long time, I'm reading about...
I think your earphones are getting feedback.
It's tough to get old. I remember what, they had an ordinance that you had to have shrubbery in front of a tree if you're on a main road, like Belterre or Palm Coast. But I don't see that anymore. I don't see people putting shrubs by their fences. Now, I know this was to hide those wooden fences that look awful after a while. But what happened to that? That is gone with the wind? That's one thing. Now, you're talking about, you're planting a tree. An organization says, well, I'm going to, like the Ford Foundation or the Ford dealership. They planted those trees 20 years ago. And just now, we're just hiding the top of the buildings, and we still see all the cars and the signs, just for sale signs. And that doesn't do us any good. Now, I hear this, everybody's saying, you come up Palm Coast Parkway, and it's beautiful. An auto repair is not beautiful. A tire place is not beautiful. Restaurants are not beautiful. So when I came to Palm Coast, it was beautiful. Now, Palm Coast Parkway is like my old, when I was in New York, the old but the Sunrise Highway. I don't know if you're familiar with it. You're not.
I don't think
That-
so, Jack.
It was a highway with stores, and that's all Palm Coast Parkway is. It's a highway with stores, and you can't tell me that that's a beautiful sight. Going east, marvelous, marvelous. The original city council made sure that that area stayed pristine. And they didn't give a damn what happened up on the west side. They could have built millions of stores, one right on top of the other, and they didn't care. Now, that was the old city council. But you talk, I don't see anything here that says, let the public put their 2 cents in. All I see is, it's on the internet. Well, a lot of people don't have an internet. A lot of people don't have computers. And a lot of people like myself are a little computer stupid. So we don't know what the hell's going on. So you can put anything on the internet and we don't know what's going on. So, if you're going to do it right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Morning, George Mayo, Palm Coast. I saw on one of the slides that they showed the picture of Target there. My question is, and I asked this years ago and was told it was code, when you're in the parking lot of Target, excuse me, for the commercial development, if you're driving in there where the parking is, they have an exterior access road that kind of is separate from the parking area. The plantings that are there, when you try to pull into that access area, has grown so high you cannot see the cars going by you, and it makes it unsafe. And some of the trees are low canopy or whatever you might call them. I don't know if there's some rules that are in there that should require the shrubbery for the owner of the property to keep it low enough for sight lines for the cars, or rethink the shrubbery that you're planting for access roads so as to make it safer for the customers. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning, Alan Peterson. I'm somewhat remiss in that when I looked at the internet last night, I was looking at apparently an amended copy of what's under the Planning and Zoning Board. But my questions, what I'd like you to explain in more detail, if you can, are the requirements of an existing resident as to what the resident can or cannot do now with their property. Before, it was very onerous if you wanted to cut down a tree that had grown very large on your property. The question is, what now does an existing homeowner have to do? I went to a couple of these meetings earlier this year in June and July, and I would like to see that what the homeowner has to replace is the same type of tree that a brand new home would have particularly on the larger trees. As we all know, they do grow, and some grow very fast than we expect, and become burdensome to the homeowner or the business owner. I'd also like to make a comment on one of your slides. You said that on tree trimming, the owner and the tree trimmer are jointly responsible if a tree is trimmed improperly. It seems to me that if a tree trimmer has received approval from the city, then the trimmer should be responsible for it, because the trimmer now knows or should know the rules and regulations. If it's not an approved tree trimmer, then yes, perhaps you have the homeowner and the tree trimmer jointly responsible. But if the tree trimmer is certified by the city, then it ought to be the trimmer's responsibility, not the homeowner's. Joint responsibility gets very hairy. And one last thing, the old original regulation said that you had to have one tree every 2,500 square feet. Now the new regulations say that if let's say that a lot is 11,500 square feet. Before you only needed 4 trees. Now, as I understand what's being proposed, is you need 5. Lots are relatively small in Palm Coast, and an 11,000 square foot lot, in my opinion, is small. To add one more tree to the to the lot seems to be excessive. 4 should be sufficient. But if you can just today at least explain exactly what a homeowner has to do, existing homeowner, if they wish to remove a tree, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker. So you don't approach the podium and close the public portion. Back to council, but first, staff, we've got some questions. There was a question about a requirement to have a shrub at the base of a tree at an intersection, or, as I recall, there were shrubs in front of fences.
About a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, we made a modification to that section of the code when we were kind of doing the fence ordinance around that time period. And what we found, for example, in Belterre, when we did have the requirement to put shrubs in front of the fence, we found it's out of sight, out of mind. So, you don't have irrigation, so someone has to go into the city right away to water. If they don't have a fence, they have to drive around. So as we were doing the beautification projects, as we continued to do the beautification projects and are implementing our bike and pedestrian plan, how we're doing the plantings, they're irrigated, so we know those are going to live, so that's why we made that change maybe about a year and a half, 2 years ago.
The other problem we had in the past, if you had a side yard fence and you planted shrubs on the other side of the fence, then you had to go on your neighbor's property to maintain the shrubs. So therefore, as you say, out of sight, out of mind, they didn't get maintained. And a dead shrub is probably less attractive than a decent fence.
Correct.
The issue of visual buffers, as I recall in this ordinance, the extensive canopy on Palm Coast Parkway eastbound is maintained. Is that correct?
Yes.
I probably disagree with Mr. Carroll. I don't think Palm Coast Parkway looks like Sunrise Highway. The issue of parking lot, access road, visual line of sight that was raised, how is that addressed in the code?
That's maintenance, that's landscape maintenance, and we get calls quite frequently, and we go out there and we let the property owner know it needs to be trimmed, and we'd be glad to, if the gentleman wants to get with me, we can make sure that we can take care of that.
Clarification, existing homeowner, I've got a large tree that I don't want anymore, or something along those nature. What are the requirements for an existing homeowner in terms of maintaining existing trees, replacing trees, exchanging trees, however you want to describe it?
Bill Butler, city landscape architect. I deal a lot with these issues, and the biggest change here is that we are reducing the replacement requirements for these trees. We will never tell a homeowner he can't remove a tree. Contrary to some other beliefs that if it's a specimen tree, you can't remove it. Yes, you can. The previous code required a 4.5-inch caliper tree to replace a historic tree, and now that requirement has been dropped to 2 trees per table 11.4, which is a 2-inch caliper 30-gallon tree. The idea here is that a homeowner would have to hire a contractor with a bobcat or an end loader, and the trees are very expensive. The thought is that these smaller trees will grow fast, sometimes faster than the bigger trees, and establish quicker. And that was the change on that. On a specimen tree, it would only be 1 tree per table 11-4, which is, again, a 2-inch caliper 30-gallon tree. So they have to meet their tree densities, and if the tree density is met already, after the tree removal, they still have to replace those trees because they are trees of, special protection and things. So if it wasn't a specimen tree and you just had a specimen tree, a protected tree on the property, you had sufficient trees without that tree, there's no mitigation at all. So that is currently in our code right now.
There was a statement that under the old code, you had to have 4 trees on a lot, now you have to have 5.
No, that's not exactly correct. It's on a sliding scale, depends on how big your lot is, and it's still 1 tree for every 2,500 square feet. Some lots only require 3 trees.
So it's the lot and not the lot minus the house?
No, it's a total lot area. That's what they base it on. So, and we have flexibility too, that, if you have a really big house, how can you put,
5 trees.
2 shade trees or whatever? So this is one of the reasons why we reduced it to just 1 shade tree. Now, the bigger the lot gets, if it's a bigger lot, you may have to have 2 shade trees, or you may have to have 3. Again, it's on a sliding scale, but we do have some help there, but you can use 3 sable palms to equal 1 shade tree. So if you have a swimming pool, you don't want the leaves, you can put 3 sable palms in place as the shade tree. So there is flexibility in that regard.
The palm fronds for the leaves.
Yeah, pick your poison. No, but it's really not that bad.
I know that. Given the current state we're in, where a lot of trees have come down, where do they fall right now? In the old code or in the new code?
Well, one of the things in the code that we haven't really discussed, though, that this is going to be a big help, and we've been explaining this to the homeowners the past week since the hurricane, because this always comes up, is that we'll go out to do a hazard tree inspection, and there'll be a leaning tree or say a tree has fallen from an adjacent property. Okay, that tree becomes the tree's owner that it fell on. It's not the responsibility of the adjacent property owner to remove it. They were not notified of a hazard previous to the tree falling, and
No, but I'm talking about the codes, these changes we're making.
A tree has come down as a result of the hurricane. Do I have to replace it via the old code or in accordance with the new code? I would assume it would be the old code until the new code is
But it
adopted.
really didn't change. It really hasn't changed. Nothing has changed in that regard, so it really doesn't matter, new code, old code. If you lose a tree in a hurricane and you still have sufficient trees, there's no mitigation.
Right.
But if you do have to replace, we're giving the property owner 6 months, which is normally 30 days.
Let me maybe help. Because we won't start enforcing the code for another at least 6 months, it will definitely be the new code that they'll have to meet when they go to replacing trees they may have lost during the storm.
And actually, Mr. Landon, it actually with the new code would help if, if there's a historical tree that fell, you're only, replace it with a 2-inch instead of the whole diameter, so it would help significantly.
Okay.
And one other thing I wanted to bring to the attention is one of the changes is the homeowners will also say, oh, we've got all these pine trees in this vacant lot next to our property. They're perfectly healthy. They're perfectly straight, but I don't like them. They scare me. They could come down, Well, anything could come down in a hurricane, as we know, or a tornado. We have enabled, with the new code, an ability for that property owner to petition the lot owner of the vacant lot that if he wants that tree out and that tree is within 30 feet of his house or within a distance that the tree could hit his house, the vacant property owner can apply for a permit to remove it, and the city would grant that permission to remove that tall pine tree. But, who pays for it? I'm sure the vacant property owner is going to want to pay for it, so the person who wanted it would probably have to reimburse him for it. But we do have that flexibility, because right now we can't. If you've got a perfectly healthy pine tree that's not uprooted, there's nothing wrong with it, we will not issue a permit for that on a vacant lot. And this is very helpful. Like in the F section, where there's a lot of sand pines, those trees are typically shallow rooted. They come down, they lean a lot, and so this will help in that regard.
Yeah, I was speaking to a citizen maybe Thursday or Friday, and they were very concerned, right? They had just gone through the hurricane, and they have the empty lot next to them has a lot of pines, many of them within striking distance of the home. And I told them that, this was going to be a new provision in the code that's going to go in. They were really, really happy about that and wanted to learn, more about how it was going to work. So.
Then the last question that I have, the issue of the joint and several liability. If you have to have a certified tree trimmer why would the responsibility be shared with the property owner? And I think I've got an answer, but.
Well, you know, that's code enforcement 101 is the homeowner is ultimately responsible. But this is a big change in our code to also hold both accountable. The homeowner is still going to be accountable. It's his property. But the training, you know, that's an added plus bonus, but, you know, we got the ability to hold both responsible.
And the reality is, even though the city ordinance may say that under certain conditions, a tree trimmer has to be certified, trained, so on and so forth, that doesn't mean the property owner will necessarily use such a certified tree trimmer. They can still hire some guy with a chainsaw in the trunk of his car, then they would have to assume the responsibility for that. The issue here, in my mind, is that we do a good and thorough job of the appropriate property owners letting them know that we want them to use, we require them to use properly trained tree trimmers. So ignorance of the law is no excuse, but the responsibility is on us to inform. Okay, I think that's all the questions that I have. Back to City Council. Additional questions, comments, or a motion?
I'll move approval of, give me 1 second.
They move to approve.
Agenda item number 2, as proposed by the PLDRB, including the new HOA language.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries without objection. Agenda item number 3, resolution approving the purchase of 2 replacement heavy equipment vehicles is approved in the 16-17 fleet budget. Mr. Landon.
Mayor, City Council, this is something we just added yesterday. Our Public Works fleet has 2 dump trucks that are scheduled to be replaced this year. We could use those 2 new dump trucks right now. Our plan is to keep the old trucks until we get done with our debris removal in our neighborhoods. So I thought this was a great idea by our staff of, it's in the budget, new budget year, and they are available this week. They can be delivered, and we can put them on the street to help remove debris in the neighborhoods ASAP.
You're going to scratch up these brand-new trucks with all those tree branches?
Yes, absolutely.
I hope so.
Because it allows us to put more resources out there in the neighborhoods right now. So, and I'll talk more about our efforts.
The assumption is, though, we have sufficient staff to man the additional 2 trucks.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because we're diverting staff where it needs to be.
Okay. Yeah. Council, questions?
I think it's a good idea. Yeah, just one question, Mr. Landon. What's the service life of one of these trucks, the 2 that we're replacing? How long have we had those?
Somebody can help. I got 7 years.
It's not a big deal. It's just
7 years is what I'm being told.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But we should add, Mr. Gruff, that it's not just the 7 years and they're gone. It's 7 years and they're evaluated for extended life or not.
For budgetary purposes, it's 7 years.
Right.
You may get 9 years out of them, and you've got the money in your budget.
Exactly. We have the financial side of it, but our mechanics are the ones that determine when it's time to release them.
Additional council questions? Open to meeting from the public. Anyone in the public wish to be heard on agenda item number 3, purchase of 2 new dump trucks? Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close the public portion meeting. Back to council. Additional questions, comments, or a motion?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries without objection. This brings us to the consent agenda, items 4 through 7. But before we vote on them as a package, I'd like to offer the public the opportunity to speak on any item if they wish, or ask to have an item removed from the consent agenda for further discussion. 4. Number 4. Okay. Anything else? Council? Okay. How about a motion to approve consent agenda items 5, 6, and 7?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries without objection. Agenda item number 4, Mr. Landon.
This is our annual cultural arts grants. It's in the budget for $30,000. Has a, I forget how many of them we have here this year, but they all meet our criteria. We give grants up to a maximum of $3,000 each. We're actually under budget with this proposal. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
And I believe at the workshop, we suggested that since we're under budget, that 6 months from now, we can offer a second bite out of the apple?
We did the same thing. The idea would not be these, but anybody else that would come forth would be allowed to apply 6 months from now.
Since we've opened the meeting to the public on this one, does anyone wish to be heard on agenda item number 4?
Jack Giles, Palm Coast. These people are getting grants. It seems like every year it's the same people over and over and over again. Is it possible that you're ignoring some other organizations? And from what I understand, there's some organizations I'd never even heard of, and they're getting grants of $2,500, $2,800. So I was just wondering, do they come every year? Do they get the same thing every year? Don't you say, well, you know, enough is enough?
Thank you. Next speaker.
Louis McCarthy, Palm Coast. I realize that every year certain organizations get it, but the organizations that do get it are usually 501c3s, nonprofits, and they do a world of good, and it also highlights the city to have arts, to have this, to have that. And I think it does a world of good. They're always short. These organizations never have enough. And there are people who are, or volunteers who are in these organizations, they give too. And I'm one of them. I give a whole lot, my wife and I. So I say, if it's $2,500 or $1,000, it ain't making them. It's not money in their big pocket. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. So we don't approach the podium. We'll close the public portion meeting, back to council. But first, in answer to the question, we have a set of standards. The availability of the grants is well advertised. The fact that we have not met our budget suggests that not only has no one been excluded, in fact, there is nobody left to apply for it, but that's why specifically we are saying 6 months from now, if there is a new organization that is created, or if an existing organization says, aha, there's the opportunity to apply for that. The issue is that these events, by the requirements of our grant, must be open to the public. Whether you are a member of that organization or not, you can't close it out to the public, so all taxpayers are afforded the opportunity to participate. Whether they choose to or not, that remains their decision. Since we opened this to public discussion, council, any additional questions, comments, or a motion on agenda item number 4?
Move approval.
Second.
And second, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries that objection. This brings us to the public participation portion of the meeting. This is the opportunity for the public to speak on any item not on today's agenda. Come up to the podium, give us your name, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Good morning, Robert McDonald, Palm Coast. Yesterday morning, Flagler Volunteer Services gathered almost 50 people to the Flagler Airport, and we gave out over 350 meals to people who needed help. There were kids, young adults, old folks like us, and even politicians. Nobody cared whether you were white, black, a Democrat or a Republican. We were there to help people. And everybody did just that. Next month, we here in Palm Coast are going to enter a new era. Maybe we should remember what folks did yesterday and learn to work together and bury the hatchet and show everybody that there's no better place to live than in Palm Coast. My second comment is only as a recommendation for the next hurricane, and I hope to God none of us are here. A lot of people don't have social media, including myself, so we should work on getting information to these folks, and also for new residents, let them know what section of the city they actually live in, not alphabetical section, but what actual section, A, B, C, D. Because for new people like us, we never knew what section we were in, so we didn't know whether or not we had to be evacuated or not. Maybe as a suggestion, we could talk to real estate companies and have them explain to new tenants and / owners about what section they live in the event that we need to bail. My third comment is, I know that, and this is directed at Mr. Landon, I know that Mr. Landon and I have had some differences of opinions, but that's okay. But I'm really glad that he was the borough administrator of this city during the hurricane. I've done a lot of history studying, and there were great leaders, Patton, Bradley, MacArthur. Landon should be one of those people, because he was the one who kept the city together, and I just want him to know that publicly.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Louis McCarthy, Palm Coast. You know, I'd like to chair the workers, the people who were out there, who left their families, and I don't know how many hours they put in. I just happened to bring up the weekly report and all the photos and stuff like that. And I can remember when I used to be in it, when I used to look at my watch and say, gee, my backup is not here. And I worked, and then get a letter at the end of the year saying, you know, it's 24 hours in a day, and you work 20 of them. The person writing the letter, they sat down at a desk, and they didn't understand how a worker works. And I'll tell you something, when I saw, look, where I live, we have pep tanks. And when I saw those trucks come to siphon out the pep tanks, I said, thank God. Now, I didn't have a problem, and I probably wouldn't have had a problem for another week or so. But my neighbors who have pep tanks almost next to their house, they had problems, particularly my good neighbor across the street who had 6 girls in his house. They came from the F section, his granddaughters, and they loaded up his pep tank. But again, the workers, we have to honor those people who got out there and worked and everything. And I hope to God that this time nobody stole a generator from one of the lights. I remember the last time generators were stole, but you put chains around them and everything to hold them down. But thanks again. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Good morning, Pam Richardson from Putter Drive in Palm Coast. What a difference 10 days has made. As a Floridian, I am amazed at the job that was done by the city. And I want to recognize some of the little things that probably nobody pays attention to, of the people, of the hard work that was done here. Between the city and the county, it's just amazing. It's amazing. We hear how we don't get along, yet everybody stepped up to the plate and did a great job. Started with the public works and the sand at Indian Trails. When I tell you there was extra shovels and people with grocery bags digging and digging and digging, and I was one of them, because I know that water is a nasty part of the game. There was a gentleman there named Dennis working for the city with his truck and the Jeep, and there was a very pregnant woman digging sand as well. All types of ages, people. Dennis was so kind to help everyone, including myself. He lifted those heavy bags and put them in my trunk. He was sweating, he was overrun with heat. It was hot, it was humid, but he did it with a smile. And I thanked him over and over again. And it was just so appreciated. And that's from the very beginning, before the storm even hit. We had radio to hear, so we could get some communications when our electric went out. The first thing I heard was responders. It was a dead silence on Belterre. And then you could hear the alarms going, the fire alarms, the people who needed help. The utility workers, when the trees went down, first was Mr. Romeo, the code officer, taking pictures, riding with another person. I had no idea who they were, but they were surveilling. The firemen saw the tree down, then the code officer saw the tree down, and all my neighbors were outside wondering, when are we going to get help? They were just worried about their electric. Everybody was doing fine. The amazing part was at night, when everybody was outside, along comes Tom Devers from public utility, I guess he's Public Works. And he's got his hard hat on, and he's working with all these out-of-town vendors that were coming for trees. And it was a relief. And Tom said, "Hey, Pam." I said, "Oh, you are my hero today. Thank you." It wasn't immediate, but everybody stepped up to the plate. I have to tell you, when you see this flexibility with all the public service workers, with all the other departments. I know Tom had worked 12 and a half hours that day. He told me how hard he was working, and I thanked him over and over again, because no matter what we all see politically, it's really important to appreciate those people who work so hard for all of us. Every one of them worked tirelessly.
15 seconds, please.
Wow. Mr. Landon, thank you. Thank you for a phenomenal job. I've been in Florida my whole life and lived through at least a dozen hurricanes. I've never seen a city put together like this city is. Every road passable, every street cleared. An amazing job, unsurpassed by ever any city manager in any city in Florida, in any of the places I've lived. So I want to thank you, the mayor and the city council, for wonderful support. This town is amazing. Thank you so much.
Next speaker.
Jack Carroll, Palm Coast. You know, I have to say that the men and the women did a terrific job, but why is it that we have to wait for a situation like this to make comments and say that they did a terrific job? They do a terrific job all year long, and we don't hear it. these workers work hard, and they work good, and they give us 100%. But you don't hear it during the year. We have to have a hurricane to say, well, they're great. No, these people that work for us are terrific. And you've got to do everything in your power to keep them here, because they're good all year round. Let me emphasize, all year round.
Amen. Next speaker.
Morning, George Mayo, Palm Coast. A couple things. First of all, thank you to all the city workers and everybody that was involved. Everybody I spoke to on the road asking questions was polite, and I know they had a hard job to do, and they did it excellently. One thing I had seen, and I had called Cindy Lane, and she was nice enough to accept my call, concerning when there's electricity out and the street lights are out. I brought this up to the county commission yesterday, and they said they were working on it to do this. I'm wondering if the city can also. One of the first things after the storm, my wife and I waited, over a day to get out, come up to a traffic light, and there are people who, with the light out, they figure they have the right of way, and it was just the wild, wild west with cars just running through the red lights in all different directions, making it hazardous. And I'm wondering if the city, as well as the county, can have more portable stop signs, like the large 3 or 4 foot ones on sawhorses, that they can immediately put out at intersections where there are traffic lights out, so as to have some safety out there. The other thing was, I don't know when electricity is out, FPL makes the decision on where, and they're going to establish electricity first. I suppose it goes upon where the damage is most and who they can get it to first. I'm not asking to be first to be connected. I waited 4.5 days. Some people waited less, some people waited more. That's not the issue. But as was mentioned here before, all things being equal, I'm wondering if the city has any say in asking FPL to restore electricity to people with PEP tanks as opposed to gravity feed, if the situation being equal, so as to reduce the amount of PEP tanks in the trucks and the work that they have to do. The other thing is, as I've mentioned before here, the right turn lane going northbound on Belterre Boulevard and 100. I have spoken to Mr. Flanagan a few times, and he's been very helpful in talking to me about it. I had mentioned before how the traffic had backed up to Zebula at one time, and I said before long it's going to back up to the senior center. Well, a week ago today, on Tuesday, my wife and I were going out, and the traffic was backed up to the stoplight all the way back to the senior center, which is almost a half a mile. I understand that the right turn lane is a separate project from the shops of Palm Coast going in there, but I was hoping it could be expedited and put in ASAP along with that whole thing, because backing up a half mile is pretty ridiculous. We're spending hundreds of thousands to coordinate the traffic on Palm Coast Parkway, but yet you have this one traffic light where it's really backed up. So I'm wondering if we could make sure that that is expedited and have that. That may not take care of everything, but it will sure help reduce a lot of the backup. And again, thank you for everybody in the city for all their work and hard work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker. So no one approach the podium. We'll close the public portion meeting. Go back to council. For all of you who had words of thanks to our city manager, to our staff, thank you for your comments. Thank you for your appreciation of a job well done. And I want to point out that it's not just the men and women out on the street. It's not just public works. It's not just code enforcement. It's not just the utility department. But there were a significant number of city employees putting in a significant amount of overtime in the buildings, inside, answering phone calls, doing dispatching, doing coordination, doing public information. I don't think there was a single city employee who wasn't called into duty, overtime, extra time to help make this as I'm looking for. To make it as least painful to our citizens as possible. And I too agree. I've seen hurricanes in this state. I've seen hurricanes in other states. I've seen how other cities respond. I think our response was absolutely magnificent. Mr. McDonald, you're tipping your hand that you're from New Jersey when you talked about the borough administrator. We don't have any boroughs in Florida. The issue of traffic lights out and how many portable generators you've got, and the possibility of portable stop signs. What we've put out on all the social media is if a traffic light is out, you are to treat it as though it were a four-way stop. I know that I've seen myself that if you're on Palm Coast Parkway, you assume that you have precedence over Old Kings Road. The bigger road should have the greatest power. That's not the way it works. So that's something to think about in the future, possible portable stop signs.
If I could address that,
Four-way stop signs, something of that nature.
First priority is get the generator hooked up and get the light operating. So in lieu of spending time with stop signs, a lot of the signals we can get operating very quickly with the generators. So that's our first priority. But I think it's a good idea that if we cannot get them operating quickly, then a portable stop sign. But and I think our crews did a great job with getting most of the signals operating very, very soon after they went out. There were people who were just driving around, shouldn't have been driving around, and we're just never going to control that. And I agree with the gentleman that people don't seem to understand that if it signals out, it's a four-way stop by law.
There was another comment about identification of the region where you went. I remember immediately after talking with the county about how do you define where a mandatory evacuation is. The initial description was vague. We said try to be more specific. Go by street, go by F section, C section, go by east of, west of. But there's something, again, that we can look at that as we do our after-incident reviews as to how you get the information out. You're right, not everybody has social media, but a huge number of people do. But we need to be sure that we're addressing all people with or without Facebook and Twitter and all those neat things.
Agree with all those comments, and yes, there was some confusion as to what those zones mean and where they are. We've already started that discussion to see how we can improve on that communication. It's one of those things where we lots of times in the business know what it all means, but when you haven't had one for 12 years, most people out there don't. So yes, we need to attempt to improve on that.
Maybe in the hurricane preparedness book, we can have something that shows the zones.
It's in there.
Oh,
It is in there. See, that's, we have a different ways of getting in there, but yes, it's quite prominent in that book. I think it's a whole page. But there's other things we can do too.
The last comment was, how does FPL decide which to turn on first? I can guarantee you that there was a lot of begging, pleading, demanding, screaming, yelling between our staff and FPL about the necessity of the portion of the community on pep tanks. That is, it's not just a question of inconvenience. Being without electricity, I got mine on Monday night at 8 p.m. It's an inconvenience not to have electricity. It can be expensive to replace the food in your freezer. But if your pep tank isn't pumping and you're getting raw sewage backing up into your home, that is a health hazard bar none. So I can assure you that the city was in constant communication with FPL. But let me point out one of the problems that FPL faces. This is the chicken and the egg kind of thing. You go out, there's a tree down, and behind the tree there's a power line down. Well, FPL can't get to the power line till we get the tree out of the way. If there's a tree down and there's a power line on the tree, we can't get the tree out of the way until FPL deals with the power line. And there was a tremendous amount of that interaction in the early moments after the storm, after the winds died down. And there was, I will tell you, there was constant communication between the county, the city, our debris contractors, FPL, all of the parties. I will tell you, you got about as much interagency cooperation as you could ever reasonably expect to get. I know Mr. DiLorenzo spent several days down at the EOC volunteering, answering phones. Everybody was doing their part, and I got to say that we ducked a big one on this one. And we had tremendous impact. The cleanup is still going on around the clock, 7 days a week. Some areas haven't had their tree limbs and their brush picked up. We will get to it. And I will tell you that every street is going to get 3 passes. Because what I noticed on Florida Park near my home, there was huge amount of debris, brush, tree limbs. That's been cleaned up down to the bottom. But now you're starting to see a second go-round. People are now pulling the stuff out of the backyard, putting in bags. There will be 3 passes through our neighborhoods before this is finished. But, job well done. This brings us to discussion by City Council of matters not on the agenda. Mr. Cuff, we'll start with you, sir.
Okay. Just one thing related to the debris cleanup that you were just discussing, Mr. Mayor. One thing I've noticed in the sections that the contractors haven't been able to get to is people are starting to bring out construction debris and pile it on top of the brush. And I know that's not supposed to happen, and I assume it's going to make the ultimate cleanup that much more difficult. If there's, I know we're already asking more from the city workers than we have any right to, but if there are instances of that where city, code enforcement, utility workers are out, if we could have some kind of a courtesy notice we could put in the front door of a homeowner who has a pile like that in front of their house, it seems to me it might help with the frustration, 3 or 4 days from now when their pile doesn't get picked up because the contractor can't remove the construction debris and can't remove the branches because there's construction debris on top of it. But generally, although it's going slow, I'm amazed at how much has been done. And I would have compared Mr. Landon to Omar Bradley rather than those other illustrious leaders. But I don't. But he's blushing already. So I don't go there. Yeah. But that's other than to echo everything everyone else has said about the hard work and the cooperation. That's just a practical item. And again, I think maybe we rely too much on social media, because I spend all day on my phone and on my computer and on my tablet. I think everybody knows, but I'm betting there's hundreds, if not thousands, of residents that, saw everybody else hauling it out to the side of the road, and they're just following along and piling it all up. So, that's
Mr. Nobile.
A few things, Mr. Mayor. First, I want to iterate everyone with the thanks, but I want to follow up with Mr. Carroll and let everyone understand that this kind of reaction to a disaster doesn't just happen. It's from a culture of a city organization that happens all year long. It's just, we have a great staff, we have great leaders in our directors, and these people are dedicated and they feed the culture of our organization. And when the disaster hits, they're just moving in regular motion. They know how to function, they're ready to get on board. So just wanted to reiterate what Mr. Carroll said. This is all year long this is happening, not just now. The other thing I wanted to bring up is PEP systems also, because I live in one. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but
Please don't.
Okay. But these PEP systems can be hooked up like they are by generator for like we do with the trucks. We send trucks out, to certain people. I was wondering if we could look into or if it's already in process to start changing out the PEP panels, the panels that are there, and include panels that could have a generator hookup. So most of the people who have generators can just get it, because right now, if you did it, you'd have to open it, and you'd have to wire it. We don't want people doing that. But if there was just a user-friendly plug-in, boom, and you hook it to your generator, that'd be nice. I know there's an expense behind that, but there is an expense behind also sending out the trucks. And hopefully, we never use this again, but I would not count on that ever having to happen again. So just wanted to bring that up. And also, just one quick question. So the 3 passes on the vegetation. What about non-vegetation?
Yes, same concept.
It's going to come after, or is that happening?
I'm not sure the timing of it. Right now, our vegetation is our priority. I'll go through all that. From the beginning as to what we're doing, and hopefully try to once again help educate the public
on what to do.
The best way that they can help us help them.
Up there, super. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. DiLorenzo.
I think little consumer beware that I heard about this week is insurance companies sending in contractors from out of state to do roofing repairs. And although it's in his power, the governor has not lifted the licensure. You have to be state licensed, Florida state licensed, to do roofing. And I have heard of an example of an insurance company sent in a roofing company from Arizona to do the work, and they said, no, yeah, my insurance company sent me, I can do your work. But that is not accurate. They still have to be Florida licensed, and they still have to come in and get a permit, and we've waived many of the permit fees, but the permit still has to be acquired. So just a little consumer beware on that one. Make sure your contractor is state licensed. You can check their license at myfloridalicense.com, and just be careful.
Thank you. Ms. Shipley. I had the opportunity last Thursday to attend a meeting in St. Augustine between the CFO of the state, Atwater, and the new insurance commissioner, and about 30 representatives of the insurance industry here in Florida, echoing the same kind of caution, Mr. DiLorenzo. Yes, you want to have licensed contractors, but be careful of something that the insurance industry calls AOB, Assignment of Benefits. It is not unheard of for a contractor to say, oh, here, sign this, and I'll collect directly from your insurance company. Do not get yourself hooked up with an assignment of benefits. The insurance company pays you, you pay the contractor. And something that the city has put out, do not make your final payment to the contractor until you have seen written evidence that the city has done the final inspection. We're not charging you a fee, but we still want to ensure that the work is done properly and to code. Be very cautious of assignment of benefit. Discussion by city attorney of matters not on the agenda.
Nothing specific unless there's any questions.
Mr. Reichman, I think Mr. Mayo was here today, and he had some questions.
About the drones.
Question about drones.
Sure, the registration. We had talked about this at the workshop, and there was an issue about registration. This is a federal requirement, and there's a process you have to go through. You can do it online. I think the issue is, well, what if you don't? And I was telling Councilmember DiLorenzo, the federal government apparently does not have it in its wherewithal to have a state of drone police. But our code enforcement officials or the sheriff's office, if they were to see someone out there flying a drone in violation of the federal requirements that do exist for how you operate a drone, or without a registration, would be able to notify the federal government. The federal rules require that while number one, you have to have it registration. You get a certificate. You don't have to have it on your person, but you have to have it readily available. So I'm assuming if you're out at a park or something like that, you'd either have it with you or you'd have it in your car or something like that. As far as the penalty that goes, obviously you could lose your registration if you're out there violating the manner of operation that are required by the federal government. If you are flying one and your registration is suspended or is run out, or you don't have it with you, maybe they would suspend it or revoke it. There are criminal and civil penalties. I'm not aware that there's a cottage industry in the federal government of going out and capturing drone operators and charging them lots of money. But that's how it works. I know that that's going to be one of the bigger issues as far as the operation for the safety and privacy, and we talked about that last week. But that was to address the specific questions that you had, sir, with regard to the registration requirements and how it would work in the real world.
If I can just piggyback on that, for council members, in this current issue of quality cities, there is an issue about drones, and I've highlighted a portion of it and left it on the desk. So, council
Good
members,
article.
if you care to read that,
yep,
gives you some interesting insights into drones. Discussion by city manager of items not on the agenda.
Well, I obviously going to talk about a little hurricane in the follow-up. Because one of the things I want to stress is we're not done. I appreciate all the nice comments. I know I've got a great staff, but it's great to see them really kick it in when they need to. And the comments about every day, every week, I think are right on target. And you can just see the culture. You can just see the work ethic. And what was really, I think, extremely positive from my standpoint is they didn't care what their job title was. You know, when we had PEP tank issues, we had firefighters on tankers, we had code, we had building inspectors, you know, public works, they really shifted into what our priorities were. And every morning we talked about priorities and how we're going to shift the resources there. And then to see them really get after it was very exciting. We're still doing that with the cleanup. So appreciate that. And yes, Mayor, your point of a lot of people you don't see, whether they're taking a phone call or making sure that a lot of logistics are happening so the people out on the street can get it done. A lot of effort there. Very, very proud to be part of this organization. All right, I'm going to try to hit the different subjects that were out there. PEP tanks. The FP&L people, it's really interesting because they bring in a lot of resources from out of town. The fact that South Florida did not get hit hard by Matthew actually was to our benefit because a lot of those South Florida resources headed up our way. They have never heard of a PEP tank in South Florida. I found that out. Some of those people now know what a PEP tank is and knows what happened when the pump's not working. So yes, we really stress that. And they have critical facilities that they prioritize. One of the after or post-event efforts we're going to make is that our PEP tank areas are included in their priority. Because it's one thing, as the mayor said, not to have power, not to have lights. It's another thing to see raw sewage come up in your bathtub. So, and that's the outcome of that. The other thing, though, is what I learned is how when we make a couple of phone calls, when we get staff together, you can pump those PEP tanks out. In other words, you don't have to have electricity. We had a dozen to 15 generators on backup pickups with 2-man crews, and most of those were people from code and firefighters, et cetera, helping out utility. And that's where Mr. Noble's point is that they can, we wired those generators so we can plug them into the PEP tank panel on the side of the house. The thing got the pump going, and as long as you pump it down, then it lasts for hopefully another 2 or 3 days. So some of the older ones you have to wire and not plug in, and so we will look at if there's what we can do maybe with the replacement program as post-effort. Still like us doing that and not the homeowner, but we can talk about if there's something we can have the wiring, no question. Anybody that gets in and wires it to crazy, it's dangerous. So we don't want them to do that. So, but very excited or proud to see how people kicked in with the PEP tanks, and we will continue to try to improve on that system for the future. Debris removal. first of all, the first response of having people out there clearing streets and getting after it, so our vehicles, emergency responders, you know, whether it's Public Works or you know, the code people who are helping identify where the issues are. And you know, someone said, I didn't know firefighters had chainsaws on their trucks. Yeah, I mean, it's all hands on deck. And I think an initial attack was excellent. I think that's what you all are acknowledging. I'm very proud of that. Then we had really ended up being 3 priorities after the event for us, and we're still in those 3 priorities. No, I'm not going to do it in specific order because they're all priorities in my opinion. But one of them are hazardous trees. I'm leaving here, I don't know, 6:30, 6:45 on my way out yesterday, and our tree guy that inspects trees to determine whether he's coming in looking pretty worn and tattered and tired, and he told me that he believes it's over 1,000 trees he's tagged needing to come down. And there's still more of them out there. And just so the public knows, we have 2 processes. If it's on public property, on city property, or city right-of-way, maybe a park site, something, once we're identify the hazardous trees, our crew goes out and cuts it down as quickly as possible. If it's on private property, we, because of the state of emergency, and our code allows us to do this, we in essence give people about a 2-second notice that they need to get the tree down. In other words, we do post the property, but as soon as our contractor, because we have a contractor, can get to that tree, they take it down. And so we're not waiting for the next wind gust so we can go through a bureaucratic process. We take it down. Because we're not giving people the typical notice, I've authorized the waiving of the administrative fee. We still charge that property owner our direct cost for what the contractor charges us, but and also just trying to show some compassion, our $100 administrative fee we are waiving for all those trees coming down. So the property owners will get the bill, but it's just our direct cost. And what we're finding is our contractor usually is a little cheaper than what they can get out on the street because of the quantity that they work for us. That coordination has been amazing, and it's Tri-County. I just know them as Tri-County. They're doing a great job for us out there. Yes.
On Patuxent, which is near the Belterre Swim and Racket Club, a tree came down in a vacant lot. It's a big tree. It must have been across the road because it's obviously been cut up. But the rest of the tree is down. How will that be handled from our?
We do not. If it's a all right. Two
it's
things.
It's a big tree too.
2 things. If it's originated was not on city property, city right away. It's just strictly on private property.
Right.
And it's down, the city does not get involved. It's going to be up to that property owner to clean up their property. If it does fall on somebody else's property, then it's between the 2 property owners. And as someone I think said, is that if they knew it was a hazard, had been notified that it was leaning and didn't do anything, then it's where the tree was located. If it's just an act of God, what they call act of God, in other words, a storm, then it's not going to be on the property.
But will this
the cleanup will have to be the property owner in this case.
It's a vacant lot. They're not here. So will this turn into a code enforcement?
If it's determined that it's a code violation, a downed tree is not necessarily a bad thing on a vacant lot, unless it becomes a nuisance or that type of thing. So
pointing towards the street is not. I wouldn't call it a nuisance, but it looks odd.
Okay.
I mean, it's a big. I mean, it's probably.
We have
18 inch.
We got hundreds of them out there.
Right.
I don't have an answer for
Okay.
you as to how we would address that. We will get it off the right of way and those type of things. And the other thing that we typically don't do is go on to private property if it's a city tree, but in this case, once again, make an exception that if it's a city tree, in other words, it was started on the city and came on private property, we are removing that whole tree with not getting into a fight as to whose tree it is and whose insurance. We're just trying to get it done. But that's only if the tree originated on city property. Moving on with the rest of debris removal, First of all, to address Mr. Cuff's issue is more information we get out there, the better. We have really 4 type of pickups. One of them is the bulk vegetative, the trees, the stuff that you can't put in bags, it's just bulk. But it was storm debris. The second one is more of what I call construction debris. In other words, the fence, the shingles, the non-vegetative. You can put that out on the curb. We will pick that up also. And Mr. Cuff, exactly right. Do not put them in the same pile. One of them is going to get chipped up into mulch. The other one's going to go to landfill. So if you put them in the same pile, it just causes our job to be a whole lot more difficult. What we are doing right now is primarily the vegetative, and I'll come back to kind of where we are with that. Mr. Cuff, what we're actually doing is we're having city crews in front of our contractor that's picking it up, preparing those piles for them. So instead of, once it's happened, we just have a crew, and sometimes the tree is just put there whole and they can't get it in the truck. We have chainsaws, we start cutting it up. So we get out in front of the truck that picks it up to make sure the piles are ready for them to pick up is what we're doing, and instead of trying to get the homeowner to do that. It's just a service we're providing and trying to get it done as quickly as possible. The other 2 piles will be yard debris, vegetative debris in bags, which you can't chip up. See, it's all a matter of that, that processing. And then regular garbage, trash, recycling pickups. We've asked Waste Pro to handle those other 2. Their normal Wednesday pickup are obviously not doing because we're not limiting the size. So we've asked them just to go around and pick up the bags, because these big trucks are picking up the loose debris. You can't throw the bags in the truck because it's going to a chipping pile. So they got through less than half of the community last Wednesday when Waste Pro was doing their regular Wednesday yard debris pickup. They worked Saturday and maybe some Sunday, I'm not sure, but I believe the whole community, the bags have been picked up. Now, when you drive down the street, do you see black bags of yard debris? Yes, because as the mayor said, as soon as we pick up the bags, there's more that comes out. They will come back.
Does that include like garbage pails also full of vegetation?
Yeah, the trash cans full of vegetation. Waste Pro will either throw in the back of their truck, or if it's something that possibly the yard debris people can throw in the back of their truck, but those will get thrown in one of the trucks. Okay. Probably most likely Waste Pro. You won't see.
I'm sorry. They're not doing the Wednesday pickup?
Yes.
Oh, they are?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Only, but only bags.
Right, bags and trash bags.
Right.
Trash cans.
Right, exactly.
Yes, okay.
Because there's more trash bags than what they normally would have on a normal route. So that's how we're trying to divide up the resources. Okay. And have to divide up the material because it all goes to a different place. What we have right now out in the neighborhoods is both our contractor called Crowder Gulf. They're a company. How do you like this job? You sit around waiting for a disaster, your phone rings, and then you kick it in. That's the only thing you do in life. But all the flooding and fires, that's what they go. And so we always have a tough time because I only think Palm Coast, but everybody reminds me that we aren't the only one that was hit by this storm. And the same company that provides us service are up in South Carolina, North Carolina, and they provide all this resources that they have subcontractors. So you don't see the name Crowder Gulf on the trucks because they contract with more local. But we have a lot of trucks here from Gainesville and the Orlando area and wherever but they're spread out throughout the whole region. Last report I had were somewhere between 10 and 15 trucks. Our city crews are out there doing it too. So you will see the city dump trucks and the city crews. It's not just public works. So now utility is geared up, and we have utility people who are on those dump trucks, and utility dump trucks and their resources are in the neighborhoods. I have a little report here. We have a total of a little over 600 truckloads have already been picked up, It represents over 23,000 cubic yards of just yard debris. If you want to see what that looks like, drive by. Don't go in, please, but you can see it as you drive down US 1, the huge piles. And we're not even halfway through with our first round. So it is a huge task. And we have as many resources as we possibly can. Your help today with a couple of dump trucks that we can bring in will help. It's a lot like power. When your neighbor has power, it doesn't make you feel real good. And when your neighbors got picked up and you didn't, but all we can do is ask for people to be patient. It is a high priority, along with getting the trees down, because we still have some trees that need to come down. The other priority we have that is pretty well taken care of is making our public facilities safe. Things that, I really don't think about, but it was great to see our crews think about. School was going to open back Wednesday. Kids walk and ride their bicycle from their home to the school. We put a priority on all those routes and making sure the sidewalks were cleared off. Mom, this weekend it was great weather, Mom out there with her stroller at the park there at the community center. Those big oak trees, we made sure they were safe. So when Mom was out there, we didn't have one of those limbs coming tumbling down with their kids. So we worked hard on making our facilities safe, knowing that people, great weather right now, are going to be out using those. But our top priority there was just the safety and the cleanup to make it happen. We've also tried to do our part in the parkways. As neighbors are cleaning up, we're trying to make the community look presentable, and I think our crews have done a great job there too. So that's kind of where we are, those three priorities: get the neighborhood picked up, get hazardous trees that are still standing down, and making sure that public facilities are safe for people to use now, because they are out there using them. Okay, the PEP tanks. Did I miss something that, as far as the storm? I have one other issue that's going to be an interesting issue. Mayor, you said we would do 3 passes on all streets. It's actually 3 passes on all public streets is what we're dedicated to do. One of the issues that I know is going to come up is our gated private streets. The gated communities are private streets. We don't work on private property. Those private streets in all the gated communities, we don't maintain the streets, we don't resurface them. Right now, our policy is we don't go in and do debris cleanup other than what Waste Pro would normally do. Some of the larger ones, like a Grand Haven, we've been in communication with. They know that. Doesn't mean all the leadership knows it. Doesn't mean all the residents know it. And the leadership is aware of it. They actually have funds set aside for emergencies. They have a community development district, so it's a taxing district that is set up for this. Some of the smaller ones, I'm not sure they know. There is a process we can go through to be reimbursed by FEMA, because a lot of this is going to be reimbursed by the federal government. But we have to have formal agreements. City Council has to say, yes, we can go on private property. But that is a slippery slope. Let me give you an example. Canopy Walk. That's a gated community. It's a condo. We go in and clean up their parking lot if they put it all out in the parking lot. I've had a phone call from someone in a condo that they wanted us to go in and pick up their stuff on their parking lot. If you do that, do you go to Walmart and pick it up off of their parking lot? Us working on private property and then the backyards. So we are, it has not been a high priority, but we will reach out to all the homeowners in the gated communities and ask what their plan is and what their efforts are and see how we can help. But unless City Council adopts ordinances and that policy for us to go on private property, we don't go on private property. But I do think it's important we try to reach out and let them know what some of their options are, and we will do that.
The gated communities have a mechanism for working through FEMA for their collection?
The community, ones that have a community development district, that's a taxing district, I believe they do. I'm not an expert in that area. Talking to the representative from Grand Haven, they are aware of that and have prepared for that. It's just a different animal than what we're used to. So, but it is, you know, it's tough public policy because they are taxpayers, but they don't allow the rest of us to drive on their streets, and you know, they're private, but they want the rest of the public to pay for their cleanup that they won't allow on their streets. So you can see where that's why they pay you the big bucks to make those kind of calls, public policy. We are going to reach out and see what we can do, and we may have to bring something back for City Council to decide on this public policy. It's not something we've really had to deal with. FEMA has some guidelines. You know, for example, they won't touch it unless they've gone through their private insurance company first. So it's just difficult when you are dealing with private property. In the gated communities, those streets are private property, so keep that in mind. And so when we say we're picking up off of city public property is what our criteria is. I think that is, unless anybody else had any questions or you think I missed something, kind of an overview. There is one other, couple other announcements. I want to make sure I get this date right. The reception for Mayor Nets that people are organizing was last Thursday. Did y'all make it?
Jack gave his sorries that he couldn't make
no, obviously, you know, with the resources being dedicated to other things, we weren't going to organize a reception. It has been rescheduled. It's in this building for Thursday, November 3rd from 4 to 6:30 to recognize the 2,459 years that Mayor Nets has put in.
Seems that way.
The other thing is my new parks director almost lost his job earlier this week. I think it was Monday, because he announced that everything was open and safe for the public to enter as far as our parks, except for Holland Park. And he could have gone all day without bringing that one up, right? Seriously, we are still focusing on getting Holland Park done. Our crews are not working out there, but we have done what we said we were going to do and started contracting directly with the subcontractors. And for the most part, Tummelson White has allowed us to do that and said, great, you know, go ahead and take it over. Two things happened yesterday. One of them is I confirmed that we're at a point where we really don't need Tummelson White now to get it done. Secondly is the owner, you email them about the subs getting paid. It says, oh, I'm on vacation. I don't know about you, but that really irritated me. So I have sent out to them, they either get their subs paid for the amount that we've paid them by the end of this week, or else he's going to have a job to do to fire them and go to the bond company and be done with them. And I think we're at that point, just so you know. In the meantime, we've got people out there working and subcontractors. So to say you go on vacation when you have subs trying to get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, I thought was a little over the top when you're having these kind of problems. So we will react accordingly. Just give you that update. It is a total different scene out there, though. I mean, we've got sod down, we've got landscaping going in. It is really coming along quite nicely ever since we've basically took the project over. And I had our landscape contractor said, quote, it's a difference of night and day when your crews are out there versus Tummelson White. So I think you're going to see good progress. Lastly, and probably the most exciting news today is those of you that have students that are in algebra classes. My granddaughter texted me and said she got a B on her Algebra 2 test, midterm today. So that was good news. That's the best news I've had all week. So, Mayor, with that, I'm finished.
Founders Day?
Founders Day. Tomorrow at the community. Yes, and we have some of, I think, Mayor Netz and Mayor-elect Holland will be
14 mayors
speakers.
Mayor Canfield, Mayor Netz, Mayor-elect Holland will be past, present, and future.
Community Center at 1:30 tomorrow, all afternoon event is what they put on. That's all.
Motion to adjourn?
We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.